if America's story did not begin with freedom, but with a land the world called new? Before the flag, before independence, before the dream, there were already people, languages, and memories. A question echoes through history. What truly, long before the United States appeared on any map, a vast and beautiful land existed? Cold mountains rose in the north, warm beaches stretched in the south, and wide rivers flowed through tall forests, green valleys, deserts, and open plains that seemed to stretch forever. This land was not empty. Across this wide continent lived many indigenous peoples: the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Iroquois, the Navajo, and countless others. They spoke their own languages and shared their own stories, laws, and ceremonies. To them, land was not mere property. It was home, sustenance, memory, where a story begins can change its meaning entirely. If the tale starts with European ships, it may sound like discovery. But if it begins with the people already living there, it transforms into something deeper, a story of meeting, misunderstanding, ambition. Before the dream of America, another world thrived. While that land pulsed with its own ancient rhythm, Europe was undergoing its own transformation. In the late 1400s, European kingdoms grew restless. Ships became stronger, and maps improved. Merchants craved spices, silk, gold, and new trade routes. Yet beneath this curiosity, history teaches that trade is rarely just trade. Trade brings wealth. Wealth builds armies. Armies protect kingdoms. And kingdoms with more resources often expand their reach. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west from Spain, believing he could reach Asia by crossing the Atlantic Ocean. It was a bold idea. Columbus did not find Asia. He landed on islands near a continent Europeans had yet to comprehend. Mistakenly thinking he was near India, he referred to the people he encountered as Indians. Though the name was erroneous, the consequences were monumental. His journey after Columbus, more Europeans crossed the ocean. Spanish explorers moved through the south, while French explorers ventured north. England observed, learned, and gradually grew determined to establish a lasting presence. To many Europeans, this land presented a canvas of opportunity, resources, wealth, influence. But to those already living there, this was not a new world, it was home. They were not asked whether they wanted this new age to unfold. One side called it exploration, the other lived it as disruption. The ocean became a bridge, but not an equal one. Across that bridge moved people, goods. Soon, England would cross that ocean with a plan not just to explore, but to settle. In 1607, a group of English settlers arrived at Jamestown in what is now Virginia. They came filled with hope, but hope alone could not sustain them. Many were ordinary men, neither kings nor heroes. Some sought gold, some wanted land, and others sought a second chance at life. The land did not yield easily, despite their dreams. The air felt unfamiliar, seasons were confusing, and food was scarce. Disease swept through the settlement like an unseen adversary, claiming more than half of the settlers in the first year. Jamestown sprang forth from fear, weakness, and the raw human earth. Some settlers endured because Native Americans offered their assistance, sharing knowledge of local plants, food, and survival strategies in a land the English barely understood. Without this help, Jamestown might have vanished before it became part. Yet the story complicates. The same settlers who received aid from indigenous communities over time began to seize more land. This tension lies at the heart of America's beginning. Survival on one side, loss on the other. More ships arrived, more settlers came, and towns sprouted along the eastern coast. Farms, churches, schools. By the early 1700s, 13 colonies lay under English rule. A colony is a territory controlled by a distant country. But distance alters perceptions. Colonists faced their own dangers, built their own communities, and began to feel distinct from their rulers. Some arrived freely for work, land, or religious freedom. Others, enslaved Africans, were thrust into a brutal system, bringing wealth to some while inflicting suffering on many. This is one of the darkest chapters of American history. An honest account cannot overlook it. Slavery caused immense pain and left scars. As the colonies expanded, a pressing question arose. Who had the right to make decisions for them? By the 1760s, the relationship between the colonies and England began to fray. England, having spent considerable resources on wars, believed the colonies should help shoulder the financial burden. Taxes were imposed on everyday items, paper, glass, but the anger ran deeper than finances. It was about representation. Colonists had no voice in British Parliament, where decisions affecting their lives were made. They were expected to pay and obey without ever being heard. This led to a rallying cry that reverberated from town to town. No taxation. This phrase, though simple, carried a dangerous weight, challenging the moral right of power itself. When does a government become unjust? When does obedience become surrender? When does loyalty transform into resistance? In 1773, the anger erupted into action. In Boston, colonists boarded British ships under cover of night and hurled chests of tea into the dark harbor. This moment became known as the Boston Tea Party. It was not solely about tea. It was a message sent across the ocean, signaling that control without consent could not endure. But England did not retreat. It tightened its grip. When power meets anger with more pressure, history often shifts toward conflict. In 1775, the first shots rang out between British redcoats and American colonists at Lexington, and Concord. This moment transformed the argument. It was no longer merely about taxes. It became a quest for independence. Once the idea of independence took hold, the colonies needed more than anger. They required words potent enough to forge a nation. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. A gifted writer and thinker, Jefferson was also a deeply complex man, shaped by soaring ideals and painful contradictions. He penned that all men are created equal, and that people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words were beautiful, and a careful listener understands that while the new nation proclaimed freedom, many remained unfree. Slavery persisted. Indigenous laws were overlooked, and women lacked political rights. The ideal existed, but on July 4th, 1776, the 13 colonies declared independence, naming themselves the United States of America. Yet, a declaration was nothing but ink on paper without the will to defend it. George Washington emerged as the leader who held the army together. He was far from perfect, but in the bitter winter at Valley Forge, surrounded by soldiers suffering from hunger, torn clothing, sickness, and sometimes bare feet in the snow, he remained steadfast. His strength lay not only in victories, but in resilience. With assistance from France, in 1781, British forces faced defeat at Yorktown, Virginia. The war was effectively over. A young, uncertain country had triumphed over a great empire. Yet the harder challenge loomed ahead, building a government. In 1787, leaders convened in Philadelphia. They sought freedom, yet feared an excess of power in one individual's hands. Thus, they established 3 branches of government, each meant to limit the others. In 1789, Washington became the first president. By peacefully stepping down, he gifted the new nation a rare example of power that could be relinquished. Thus, America began not as a flawless country, but as a story of an unfinished promise, a tale of courage and contradiction. The narrative still poses a question for every generation. What should freedom truly be? The inception of the United States was never straightforward. It was not solely the story of brave settlers, powerful words, and a nation rising from struggle. It was also the tale of those who were already there, of land that was already cherished, and of freedom spoken before. This history matters. It reminds us that every nation, every dream, and every human life can embody beauty and contradiction. The United States began with a powerful idea that people should have a voice, that power should have limits, and that freedom, but beautiful words alone are insufficient. A promise must be tested through action. A nation, much like a person, improves only when it confronts its past honestly and bravely pursues a better future. Perhaps this is the lesson. We may believe in kindness, yet still need to practice it. We may dream of change, but still require the courage to begin. We may long for a brighter future while needing to acknowledge the truth of our origins. History teaches us that progress is never perfect. It is built step by step by those who choose to learn. For every listener learning English through this story, this journey holds another meaning. Each sentence serves not only as a way to learn words, but also as a pathway to understanding people, power, choices,